Hello and welcome to a special Cygnus Destroyer video. Today marks the second installment in my continuing Patron's Choice segment, and this time around, my Patreon supporters wanted to see me get back to my roots. Those of you who have been following me for a while should be aware that I started solely as a retro game reviewer, and I covered several of my childhood favorites and recently discovered gems during the channel's formative years, but there is one focal point in the history of the medium that I've mostly overlooked up until now. Without further ado, let's put the spotlight on and give some long overdue support to the console that, depending on where you live, was either a massive success or a financial flop: the Sega Master System. Initially launched in Japan as the Mark III in late 1985 before being rebranded in time for its distribution into North America a year later, the Sega Master System is an 8-bit machine that boasts a number of technical specs that rival its Nintendo counterpart. The sleek and sharp black and maroon design not only features the traditional cartridge slot, but it has two games built into the internal memory and a front-loading card input that most famously allowed for the incorporation of 3D visuals, a then innovative novelty that would pave the way for the viable integration on Nintendo's iconic portable hardware of the current century. The controller that comes with the Master System remains firmly in line with the template established by the NES, but the D-pad is enhanced by a circular thumb pad that enabled uninhibited movement around the 2D pixelated landscape, which made Nintendo's feel static and stiff in comparison. The NES was my first console, so its controller has always been like home to me, but I have to admit that the Master System's is better in almost every way. The thumb pad was a brilliant addition that set Sega well above the competition, since it replicated the arcade stick experience without hampering the fast and tight side-scrolling action that was gaining favor in the home gaming environment, but Nintendo nevertheless retained the upper hand due solely to the snafu involving the pause button. In stark contrast to the NES, where the pause functionality is always comfortably available within the player's hands, Sega's pause button is solely located on the device itself. While this is far from a fun-wrecking flaw, it still poses a number of problems. The console-mounted pause button not only meant that intense gameplay sessions were frequently disturbed by awkward break transitions, but the proximity to the reset button also opened the possibility of an accidental game over. This is baffling to me on many levels. I've been gaming for countless years and I've played most of the major consoles during that time, and I'm hard-pressed to think of another that didn't have the pause button on the controller itself. The Jaguar's got one, and so does the Virtual Boy. Hell, even the crappy CDI Spoon controller has a built-in pause button, so I'll never understand why Sega thought this was a good idea. Annoying control issues aside, the Master System rightfully earned its reputation as a top-notch 8-bit contender to the NES with its gorgeous graphics, impressive accessories, and surprisingly diverse library of titles. As anyone who's familiar with the history of this Genesis predecessor should know, the Master System had an unfortunately unsuccessful run here in the US, with only around 100 titles making the stateside transition during his tragically short lifespan, but of the almost 20 that I own, there's quite a few solid hits to be found. The initial pack-ins, Hang On and Safari Hunt, for example, may pale in comparison to the legendary Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt, but the latter is a respectable showcase of the Life Phaser, Sega's answer to the Zapper. If you've seen my now ancient review of Vigilante, you'll know that I've had some headache-inducing hang-ups with the Life Phaser in the past, and a number of them still reared their ugly head during my recording. Rescue Mission failed to register entirely, and Rambo was irritatingly inconsistent, but the rest were much better than I expected, and I had a blast dishing out pixelated justice on the unsuspecting criminal scum. On the other end of the spectrum, the Sega 3D glasses were a bust for me personally because they don't fit comfortably over my prescription frames, and since I can barely see without them, I had to capture footage of Zaxxon 3D without the full effect of the ambitious accessory. Not surprisingly, this exaggerated the difficulty by adding an extra hurdle in the form of the constantly garbled graphics, but that didn't stop me from appreciating Zaxxon 3D for being one of the many quality arcade adaptations in the 8-bit Sega catalog.
As with the Big N themselves, Sega began their gaming industry domination in the arcade market, and these coin-op classics make up the bulk of the small but beautiful black and white gridded cases that make up my collection. Beginning with Hang On and Outrun, Sega quickly branched out into aerial combat with Afterburner, basic brawling with Altered Beast, and then reached the pinnacle with Space Harrier. While the former are rough around the edges and bogged down slightly by lag, Space Harrier features jaw-dropping visuals that are accentuated by the Master System's native RGB support, as well as a memorably moody soundtrack and energetic gameplay that takes full advantage of the rotational D-pad.
It's crazy to believe that this was released in 1986. Minus Super Mario Bros., the NES library from that era had nothing of this caliber to contend with it, and if I'm being honest here, even that landmark platformer looks primitive in comparison to this. It goes without saying that Space Harrier was Sega's pre-Sonic peak and is a clear example of the company living up to their famous ad slogan, but that's shockingly not the only area where they surpassed their long-standing adversary.
The SMS versions of Ghostbusters and Double Dragon not only boasted a superior presentation to their NES iterations, but the latter went over and above by including a co-op mode. The Master System also had what I consider to be a better take on Kung Fu in the form of Vigilante, the lovably quirky beat-em-up with a protagonist that evades danger by jumping through it and pummels enemies with a pair of nunchucks and a string of invisible projectile punches.
As I mentioned earlier, I reviewed Vigilante ages ago, and though I've changed a lot for the better since I made that video, one thing that remains the same is that I have a strong fondness for this game. It may not be great, and its replay value is minimal at best, but it's a lot of fun while it lasts, and it has a heart and soul that sets it apart from the majority of its genre peers.
The last remaining NES and SMS connection, albeit in name only, is Pro Wrestling. Sega's interpretation includes colorful characters, an up-tempo fight song, and a focus on tag team action, but it doesn't hold a candle to the hilarity on the NES. On a similar note, the Ikari Warriors-esque Rambo is technically better than the over-the-top craziness on its NES counterpart, but I'll save the rest of my thoughts on that Looney license tie-in for a future IUPG episode.
Speaking of IUPGs, I've already given my thoughts on Alf and Rocky over on that series, and I'll post a link for that on the screen right now so you can check it out after this is over, but more importantly, it's Carmen Sandiego time!
Yes, the iconic DOS sleuthing simulator made its way onto the Master System, and man is it awesome! We get to fill the shoes of a junior detective in training as they travel the globe in pursuit of the titular villain's thugs, only this time around we actually walk around the exotic locations and have to be actively on the lookout for danger, as the aforementioned henchmen will pop up and toss daggers in our general direction.
This is essentially Carmen Sandiego cranked to 11, and I loved every minute of it. From the unique white cartridge label to the taut as a tightrope tension and suspense, the SMS Where in the World immediately brought me back to my childhood and made me nostalgic for the hours spent playing the DOS version in Oregon Trail in school. I'm almost tempted to end the video right here because this is the pinnacle as far as I'm concerned, but we've still got 2 more left to discuss, and they're pretty good in their own regard, so let's head into the home stretch in spectacular style with the one and only
Alex Kidd in Miracle World is Sega's answer to Super Mario Bros. That was released a mere year after that Nintendo classic, but as with Space Harrier, it's leaps and bounds beyond what the NES had accomplished from a technical perspective up to that point. While Mario at that time was mostly confined to the standard left-to-right landscape, Alex Kidd shook off those linear shackles with a power punch as he rode a motorcycle into the hearts of gamers across the globe. Slippery controls notwithstanding, Miracle World is a solid, praiseworthy platformer, and I definitely recommend checking it out. closing out this tribute to the Master System is a game that was prominently featured in some of my earliest videos, Zillion 2. This SMS sequel paved the way for Vice Project Doom and other ambitious multi-genre epics by placing an equal emphasis on vehicle combat and side-scrolling exploration. The silky smooth frame rate and tight controls ensure that the action is always off the charts intense, and the pristine presentation left all but the most esteemed of competitors behind in the dust.
I know I'm becoming a broken record here, but these SMS titles that I've highlighted really are stunning in their complexity. Sega was doing things that Nintendo wouldn't catch up to until a few years later, but that sadly didn't translate into blockbuster sales, and the Master System subsequently faded into obscurity in the US marketplace. Fortunately, the advancement of the internet has helped it gain the recognition it deserved from the start, and there are now several hassle-free ways to play these games without having to drop hundreds of dollars on original hardware. You can get a relatively inexpensive third-party adapter that allows Master System cartridges to be played on the Genesis, or you can go the Mega EverDrive route and load it up with all sorts of SMS ROMs, so there's no better time to experience this underrated innovator, and I strongly encourage you all to follow the sage advice of this wicked promotional poster. Anyway, now that I've wrapped up this extravagant celebration, I want to extend a hearty thank you to all of my generous Patreon supporters. Their input has been invaluable for expanding my video ideas, and I look forward to seeing what they have in store for me in the future Patrons' Choice installments. In the meantime though, I have an appearance in the IUPG Court to prepare for. Be sure to come back for that and leave your Master System stories in the comments below. But until then, this is Matt, aka Cygnus Destroyer, signing out!
Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out the other videos on the screen right now. And if you're interested in taking your support of the channel to the next level, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon or picking up a shirt from TeePublic or Redbubble. Thanks again!